Hello everyone, once again my name is Daniel Evans and it's my pleasure to be with you again for another module in strategy. Today we'll be looking at strategy processes, how strategy is defined, how it's made in organizations, who's involved with the development and design of strategy, and how strategy is done day to day, and the different roles that people play in defining strategy. A lot of you are asking questions about while I'm interested in strategy, what type of job can I have? What role do I have in an organization? Today you'll get an understanding of exactly that. You'll get a feel for how is strategy done in real life, what roles are played, and who plays these roles. I hope you enjoy the module, and let's get started. So just a reminder, we're in the last part of our journey in strategy. We're taking a look at strategy in action. We've already considered normally the evaluation process, and now we're going to take a quick look at two separate components. The first being processes that organizations put into place for strategy, and the second, practice, which will look at the key actors and roles that these actors play within the strategy process. So our first sub-module here, or first element, we'll look at the strategy design processes and the processes that are taken into consideration. A lot of you are in a course in strategy where you're probably analyzing business cases and you work in a team and you undertake this work. And obviously in a real company it doesn't happen like this. People don't come and say, okay, here's a case study, let's go for it. Strategy is happening day in, day out in an organization. There are many processes that are scheduled, that are taking place at specific times. There are specific actors involved. And strategy is done in various ways from one organization to another. So we're going to take a look and see how it really happens. What do we do in an academic setting, and what really happens in an organization. Some of the learning outcomes I hope you get a handle for during this session. First is, what do we mean by deliberate and emergent strategy development? The second, be able to identify and deliberate processes of strategy development, and the emergent ones as well. There's many different deliberate processes that do exist. We'd also like you to be able to consider the implications and challenges of managing strategy. What are the different jobs and the management for managers and the management role? And as I mentioned before, understand some of the key actors and the roles that they play in the strategy process. So when we design strategy, we're way in front of what's actually happened. And what we'll see is that the realized strategy in an organization is not necessarily what was defined as the strategy. Sometimes we go out and set up a strategy and look later on and realize that it's not realized, or it's an unrealized strategy. But before we get into implementation and the realization of the strategy, what actually happens, we have to define the strategy. And we see that there are basically two large families of how this is done in organizations. The first is through deliberate strategy development, where literally the leader will sit down, or managers will sit down and define a strategy, or where we go through a strategic planning process to define and design strategy, or in some cases where strategy is being imposed by external stakeholders or other persons outside of the organization. If that's deliberately done, there's another process that's not deliberate, it's emergent. And emergent strategies basically look at strategies that evolve over time, that basically are not top-down driven, but are more bottom-up driven in an organization. We'll be looking at what's referred to as logical incrementalism, where strategies move step by step towards a definition of strategy and towards a realized strategy. We'll look at some of the political processes that can play a key role in how strategy is defined in some organizations, and the role that organizational systems can play in the definition of a strategy. But let's take a first look at what we'll call deliberate strategy design and development. So deliberate strategy involves intentional formulation or planning that can take many forms. So again, the key here is that there is a deliberate intent to sit down and write a strategy, which is the exact opposite of something that's emergent, where we don't sit down to do it, it just happens. Now there are two types of families of, or two big areas where we'll look at deliberate strategy development. The first is the role of the strategic leader. So a lot of you probably sitting there thinking, well, yeah, I know how strategy is done in a company. The president sits down with his top management team or her top management team and sit down and define, what are we going to do? What's our strategy? And in many cases, this does happen. Now, the role of the strategic leader is thus very central. Their role, because of their position, because of their personality, because of their reputation, they play a key role in the definition of strategy. Founders of companies, typically small family-run companies or small companies in general, are often very good at defining strategies that are fast growth strategy in nascent, fast-growing industries. They're able to build on their technical expertise in many cases in a startup situation, are able to accompany an organization in their growth. People that are recruited in large organizations to come in as for example, a recruited chief executive officer, people that come in presidents, they're recruited to bring in knowledge that they've acquired over time and in very complex settings. So they'll probably come in or be recruited to help an organization move along its growth path as they move into, for example, mergers and acquisitions and other types of strategies. So each of these top leaders, whether you're the founder or whether you're recruited from outside and you're not the founder, bring certain skills to the forefront. In some cases, the leader is seen as sort of a commander. It's going to make an order to move in a particular fashion. This can be seen in very innovative organizations where the leader really embodies the strategy, and it's a very top-down type of decision. It can be very unorthodox. This kind of a solo actor type of way strategy is defined can be also high risk. People can come in and say, we're going this way, and that's it, and I'm telling you what to do. And without discussion, without the debate, this obviously has some inherent risks. Leadership plays also a key role in defining vision. One of the key things we want from a leader is to be able to fix a strategic intent or a mission for the organization. And this strategic intent, what we want to do in the organization and what we see as our role in the economy and in the industry. This guides others in the development process. So the leader may not come in and say, this is what we're going to do, but the leader may come in and say, this is where I think the organization needs to go. And that will help guide the design process. And that's a key role that the leader plays in deliberate strategy design. The strategic leader also plays another key role in that of decision maker. Sometimes the decision process and the design process comes to a stall. It doesn't advance. And sometimes you need someone to decide, yes, do we go forward, or no, we don't. Somebody eventually has to step up and make a tough decision. And we count on strategic leaders to do that in the design process. And lastly, the leader in some organizations literally embody the strategy. They are emblematic people. They are seen as what the company represents and what we're doing and how we create value and what we stand for. Very, very emblematic leaders embody the strategy of an organization and then help it develop and because of who they are. Richard Branson, Steve Jobs, these are just some examples of the leader basically embodies the strategy. So that's the role of the strategic leader in deliberate strategy development. Now, we can also have a key role for what we'll call planning systems or strategic planning systems. These are basically used in large organizations and in corporations. And these planning systems, what do? They elaborate guidelines. A planning system will sit down and say, here's how we want to move forward. Here are the assumptions we have of the market. They'll go out and study the market. They'll look at the Pestel analysis, the Porter-esque analysis, and these systems will actually elaborate some of the assumptions that we have as we advance our strategy definition. They'll help define the strategic plans at the business unit level. So the planning system and the way it's organized, these processes will say, okay, we've now fixed the priorities, we understand the market. Let's now go and look at the plans of the BU, and let's try to analyze it then at the corporate level and adjust the BU strategies based on any feedback from the corporate level arena. Once the BU strategies are defined in this planning process or system, we then move to the corporate level. We aggregate the BU business plans. We try to coordinate them. We try to make sure they're all aligned. And then we fix our corporate strategy. And we can also then define financial and strategic targets with which we can assess, well, is the strategy moving forward, or are we on target, etc. So these systems will do that. These systems may be relatively formal. In some large organizations, requiring reports to be submitted, requiring presentations at certain times with very specific targets. And in other organizations, these systems can be very flexible with very general targets. Now, obviously, this depends on the type of environment you're in. Some environments where there's very little uncertainty, well, you don't need that much flexibility, where there's not a lot of, turbulence in the environment, maybe. Larger organizations tend to be also very structured and formalized, especially, again, if they're in a context where there's less complexity and uncertainty. And lastly, these strategic planning systems will fix a planning horizon. Our strategic plan should be maybe a 3-year plan or a 5-year plan, or if the context is very uncertain, well, maybe we're looking at, a 2-year plan or a 1-year plan. Planning horizons are a function of context. We can't say, oh, every company needs a 3-year strategic plan. Well, no, I'm sorry, that's not possible in highly turbulent industries and businesses. Let's focus a little bit more down on what we mean by strategic planning systems and what they bring to the process. So what are the roles and benefits of strategic planning, and what can we get out of strategic planning overall? So the first role that we'll look at is going to be a role of strategy formulation. Basically, the process, if it's done effectively, will help fix objectives. It'll focus the organization on its long-term orientation, and will help managers best understand the strategic issues and context. Remember, there's a lot of people involved in the definition of a strategy, and we need to make sure that everybody's on the same page if we want to formulate the strategy. So to get there, the process helps get everybody on the same page and focus our attention. The second thing, a strategy process, the strategic planning process will do is will facilitate learning and develop critical thinking skills of managers. Instead of telling them what to do and what decisions to take, if we're using the strategic planning process where there could be eventually multiple people involved, all of these people need to learn what's going on. And we don't want to tell them what we want. We don't want to tell them. We want them to discover through questioning and challenging conventional wisdom. So the process should stimulate debate and should stimulate discovery by managers. If managers are just there to do what they're told and not ask tough questions, well, you don't have to go through a whole strategic planning process. You just let one person decide. And that's, as we've seen, can be very, very risky. A strategic planning process also serves a role of coordination and integration. We integrate, as you saw in the previous slide, the BU strategies within a corporate context. We integrate different points of view and different perspectives on the strategy. Every BU may have a different perspective on the strategy, and the job of this planning process is to bring all of these actors together to not only debate and discuss and to see strategy from different points of view, but also to facilitate ownership of the strategy. Because the people are involved, because we're integrating different points of view in a collaborative design process probably, the actors become owners of the strategy. They're not just going to be executing a strategy that somebody tells them to execute. They're going to be owners of it. And because you've done this, because the planning process does this, the managers that are involved in this forum of discussion and compromise and design acceptance, let's say, will be engaged in the strategy implementation process. They own it, and so they want to see it succeed. And probably the last element of a deliberate strategy process through some sort of a planning, strategic planning process would be communication. The strategic planning process facilitates the communication of strategies throughout the organization, obviously with the people directly involved, but also the planning process should facilitate communication to other people in the organization, providing clarity on where the organization wants to go, provide a sense of security. I'm in an organization that's working on its strategy, that knows where it wants to go, that understands its mission. And so you communicate a sense of control, that somebody's actually, in charge and telling and helping decide, where the organization wants to go. And this communicative role of the planning process is extremely important. It can't happen behind closed doors and offer no communication to people in the organization. This increases a lack of sense of security. People get very concerned, what's going on, it's all hidden. And so strong communication by this process helps the organization advance, not only in the design, but the eventual implementation of the strategy. Now, there's some dangers with strategic planning processes, and I thought I'd bring them out for you. First off, we have a tendency to confuse planning with strategy formulation. Sitting down and deciding, okay, we're gonna plan, we're gonna do some marketing planning, we're gonna fix certain dates on our agenda, we're going to define resource allocation, we're gonna fix some deadlines and make some forecasts. These are all things that happens in a plan, step by step, and it's easy to get into the habit of saying, okay, what are the steps involved? Okay, you do step 1, you do step 2, you do step 3, and we'll plan our activities. That's not strategy formulations. That's just planning. That's just, fixing an agenda of actions to take, and off we go. Strategy formulation is a very, very, difficult and time-consuming process where you're thinking and debating and analyzing. It's not just sitting down and saying what we do first, what we do second. Secondly, people that are in day-to-day operations and responsible for effective implementation may be less involved than strategy experts. And this can be a significant danger. By not involving people that are in the day-to-day operations, we're not seeing their point of view. These people are often very much in touch with the organization realities and the customers and what's going on. So we're going to be missing that point of view. And the other problem with this is obvious, is that the same people that aren't involved, let's say, in the definition, well, because they're not involved in the definition, they're not going to be there when we need them for execution. And that's also a big problem. We need people to feel, again, that they are part owners of the strategy. A third potential bomb is that we have what's called analysis paralysis. So strategic planning can be a very long process. It can take a considerable amount of time. And as we dive into the process, we may find ourselves trapped in doing too much analysis. Trying to get to every little detail, trying to overanalyze things, looking at things from so many different perspectives and in so much detail, we lose sight of the big picture. And one of the side effects of this excessive analysis is that we aren't moving. We're not acting in our strategic environment, and we're missing opportunities. Doing a pre-definition or a pre-strategy and then assessing it and then doing another analysis just delays action. A fourth potential bomb is that the process can become way too complex and too bureaucratic with people contributing in a very piecemeal, non-organized fashion. And the people, the roles aren't well defined, and it kind of just comes together as, wow, it's we're getting tasks done, but it doesn't make any sense. And we lose the big picture. And the last bomb that I can think of would be that we don't leave room for innovation. Formalized, rigid planning processes that follow in sometimes a very step-by-step procedure are so formalized that they don't leave room for innovation. That they basically anything that goes against or can't fit into the process won't be included. And so we may find ourselves never considering potential opportunities. Now, there's a way around this, is that in addition to formalized rigid planning you may have in a very large organization, you can use new venture units and startup units that are managed apart from this large corporate approach to strategic planning. And that way you can make sure that these are considered and then later integrated maybe into the planning process. Does strategic planning have a positive impact on an organization, sitting down and planning this all out and doing it deliberately? Well, the jury's not out yet. Some say yes, some say no. We really don't know. It could have an impact. So maybe. But research does show that if we combine a process, a deliberate process, with an emergent bottom-up process, there is positive impact. So basically, we're going to plan on something that is bottom-up. We're going to organize ourselves so that what we do from the bottom up is effective. And this is kind of like, managed creativity. Or managed innovation that is what we call induced innovation, where the leadership of the organization will fix a process and steps and, let's say, rules that they want to be followed for a participative process. And this tends to work, what we'll call planned emergence. we've already talked about the role of the leader. We've talked about the role of the planning process. Now we can talk about the role of external actors, because deliberate strategy definition can be deliberately defined by an external actor and not an internal actor. Well, who are these external people that can come into an organization and say, this is your strategy, this is what we want you to do? There's a lot of people that can do that in different settings, believe it or not. The first would be a very powerful external stakeholder. You may have an external stakeholder or a shareholder that has an incredible amount of power. And that one person or group of people may be so powerful that you really don't have a choice in your action. Maybe an investor, it may be a member of the organization that holds a huge amount of power financially over the organization. Who knows? But in any case, it could be so powerful that your choices are very limited. Regulators can impose strategy, can say, well, you can't go for example, a low-cost strategy, or you can't differentiate in that manner. Regulators can, some example would be schools or transport systems or industries that are in difficulties. Regulators may come in, may swoop in and say, no, I'm sorry, you can't do that anymore because you're going to bankrupt the system, or you're going to cause negative impacts on people's well-being. And so they come in and regulate the industry. There can be government restrictions on structure and behavior. Your strategy, you may say, hey, let's make an alliance, or let's merge, or let's acquire a company. Well, there are restrictions on these types of strategic actions. You can't have a certain amount of market share. So you're going to have the external people coming and telling you, I'm sorry, you can't acquire that company because your market share will be too high and you'll have too much power in the industry. Okay? Oh, and also in terms of government restrictions, sometimes, and we spoke about this in the international module, sometimes restrictions require you to establish local alliances if you want to start operations or develop operations in a different country. So you may be required to do a JV. You don't have a choice. Financial markets and activist investors can play a key role. If your investors are not on board, if the market sees that your strategy doesn't make sense, or if there's a group of investors that want your organization to, let's say, have green products or whatnot, and these investors can play a significant role in driving the debate and moving votes in your shareholder meetings, then they're going to have some power over you, and you have to listen to them. Head office can impose on local units, so not really an external actor, but external to the local business unit. And obviously private investors and venture capitalists. If you're a small business and you've sought external financing for your startup in the form of angel investors, or if you're in early stage venture capitalist, or even later stage venture capitalist if you're in growth, these people just don't give you their money. They want to have a say and help you advance your company. They're going to be involved. That's what they're paying for. They're paying for results, but they're also paying for the right to have a say in what's going on